All right, Keith. So you mentioned some common problems that you'll see in squatting, but of course the challenge as a coach is how do you remedy it? So can you take us through some of the problems and the solutions to those problems?
Yeah. So like with squatting, you're going to see a lot of sort of an initiation of the squat by a rounding of the spine. Okay. So that's not good. What we want to do is we'd like to keep that more neutral, sort of erect posture and have a hinge at the hips. So just having somebody literally kind of karate chop their hip joints right here and work on a little bit of a bend pattern first. So we're kind of actually crossing it into the correction for a deadlift actually. So these are actually very related. But that's really common is we got to kind of make sure that this stays completely neutral. Now that doesn't mean vertical. It's not necessarily really easy to squat with yourself completely vertical unless you have like a counterbalance, which I'll show in a little bit. But just with your basic chair or bench or step behind you, getting people to really keep upright, keep the chest up, and think of really hinging at the hip. The weight will shift towards their heels, though you still want to keep the toes down, and try to get them to reach back. Okay? If they're still not getting it, you could get the dowel again. Stick it on their back, find those 3 points of contact that we talked about, the back of the head, the back of the thoracic spine, and the sacrum, and have them work on that hip hinge pattern, and then see if they can actually sit down and maintain that. You've got to make sure the dowel doesn't go too low, it's going to run into the object you're sitting on, so it's got to be right about at the sacrum. But this is such a simple trick to give them feedback or awareness of, oh, hey, I've lost that nice position against the dowel or the stick. Because the idea is you can talk to someone until they're blue in the face. If they can't feel that they're making the mistake, it doesn't matter. So the best coaches, and the way to coach people to improve these patterns is to get them to sort of figure out that they're doing it wrong in the first place. So just a simple dowel or simple stick is a great way. From that, we could get into what Dan John calls the goblet squat, which you and I learned about, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago in Las Vegas at a seminar we went to that Charles Staley put on where we spoke. And he mentioned the goblet squat. And it's this idea like you're holding, I think he called it like the Holy Grail. You could use it, works well with a kettlebell, works well with a dumbbell. You could use a sandbag. It's basically just having a weighted object really close to your chest, sort of as a counterbalance. And from that position, you really think of having the person keep the knees out and sink between their legs rather than doing this forward sort of into their knees, onto their toes. So the weight's really on their heels and you sink between and then drive up. It actually makes it easier than if you had no weight. So that goblet squat is another great pattern. It's almost sort of a corrective exercise drill, and that's really where we're going with this sort of second or third generation, this comeback of corrective exercise, if you will, is trying to find ways to make the exercises, the actual strength moves, the corrective exercises, and spending less time doing all this isolation work and stretching, and that needs to be done for some people, for sure. But you can fix a lot of this stuff, or you can improve it just by these little cues. So those two right there might actually go a long way into helping you or a client fix their squatting pattern.
And Keith, a lot of people now are really jacked up about overhead squatting, and while it's a great drill, so what you're talking about with the forward head, it seems a lot of people lack the thoracic mobility. So it seems like almost a better starting point with most people would be using the dowel rod on their back because it eliminates the thoracic mobility issue, right?
Or it really tells you whether they've got one. I mean, if someone can just not get, if they get themselves here and then they have to like do this and then back, that there's something that's not right. They might need some mobilization. It could be done with a foam roller. It could be done with tennis balls. They might need an adjustment from a physiotherapist or a chiropractor or somebody who's licensed or trained to do. It doesn't need to be a hard one necessarily, but they need some help to get that spine to extend because their body doesn't even have the range of motions because we're so flexion dominant now in our society. So if you're like this, I mean, even if you just try this yourself, if you really just hold yourself into like a crunch position, this is one reason why you shouldn't do too many sit-ups or crunches if you're if you sit a lot, because you're already in this position anyway. But if you hold this sort of flexed sternum posture, see how high you can lift your arms. It's not very high. So if we expect somebody who can get their arms here to then do an overhead squat, it's not going to look very good. So the goal is to be able to nail an overhead squat. They teach that as an assessment in the functional movement screen. It's a great test. Just can they even get it out? The NASM has used that for a while, but it is a kind of an advanced move because you have to actually be able to get your arms all the way overhead. So if someone can't even get here, well, they've got some sort of a thoracic issue, a shoulder issue, maybe neck problems. So that dowel on the back is corrective, but it's also an assessment.